Get it on. Here. Cool. Alright, we are live. YouTube is happy. It's so happy. Share the chat. YouTube link. Copy you, close you. Bada boom, boom. Comments are welcome. And the live chat popped out. Put it in. Okay, there's our YouTube's chat. In case anybody says something. Good. I think we are setinated. Setinated. Good. What are you doing? Are you browsing the Reddits?
Nope.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our next live stream. I am your host here today with Zhenya, my co-host, or am I a co-host? We're co-hosting. And we've already drank about a 6-pack each.
Right. One of us.
We were just trying to figure out this, our plan, right? So we had to, oh, somebody's on YouTube already. How's that possible? Hey, Jacob. Wow. Nice. Probably a Portal Mountaineer. Would assume. Welcome. All right. So if you tuned in last 2 weeks ago, we did a live stream, and we talked about computational economics. And we got into a lot of details which are currently foggy. For me, I didn't review much of it, but we did kind of just talk over it. We talked about the crowning achievement of life, the sentient machine.
Not necessarily AI related.
Right. And this is the top of the stack. It's been a long time coming, trying to articulate that. But we have a kind of a model for self-awareness, I suppose, of any particular entity within an environment. And we are going to try and, I guess, step back from that.
A little bit.
Yep, back into the guild dynamics direction. And, so why don't you take it away, Zhenya, because you've got... you seem to have a pretty good plan as to where we can go from here, and where do we want to go? We want to get into guild dynamics, right? We want to get into the kind of nitty-gritty of how does this work from the perspective of the individual within one of these corporations? What do they actually do? And as well, we are kind of still sprinting towards the concrete products that we had been discussing, such as the Portal Mountain itself, the index card game or the card box game, as well as the dashboard software and all that kind of stuff. So we're still kind of trying to sprint towards how does this actually look to organize this in a sort of, for example, using cards in a way that you can facilitate this actual corporate structure and interaction between people.
Yeah, but there's still kind of a few pieces that would shed more light on what will go in those cards, what will go in a dashboard, why things are laid out a certain way rather than a different way. So this is kind of why we're taking a small tangent to step into that direction and sort of fill in those gaps. So we've been talking a lot more about the concrete aspects of organizing what we call the guild institution, right? Which revolved around initiatives and fulfillment of those initiatives, and the whole idea of demand and supply as opposed to supply and demand
Important distinction.
view of economics, and then explained the fulfillment component of an initiative is through computation. So that was the subject of that we were trying to elaborate on.
So you have an initiative. It's like kind of a request for something to happen, and the corporation or multiple corporations will come together to
fulfill it.
to do that.
So that's the model we're looking at from there. With computation being the mechanism of how that's determined, of like what things are necessary and how
Right.
those things get put together. That's the entire subject of computation there.
Right, and you're trying to satisfy the initiative, basically. You're generally asking for some commodity to be provided or something like that.
Right, and so we elaborated that this computation has to happen in a context of agency and in an ontological reality, if you will, where you have finite resources and all that jazz. This is kind of where we have a market concept to begin with. And then putting a lens on that in terms of like being an organism inside of an environment, and not destroying this particular
Right.
stack as you're doing these
Yeah,
things.
we talked a lot about that last time, the social responsibility aspect of it, and this whole holistic, like you're connected to a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
This is why we can't just go right ahead and define the rules for the card game, because there's so much kind of context that it has to be done into. It has to be played in such a large context.
Right, it's more of an intuition, and so we're going to be tackling how to model how this intuition is modeled. Not the intuition itself that's modeled, but rather what the kind of things that are behind the intuition that is being modeled. Anyway, the details will probably clarify this a bit more than the explanation. So yeah.
Yep.
So we were talking about that computation, but we were talking about that computation in the context of again, corporations creating fulfillments or fulfilling initiatives. And so that entire discussion was around the idea of having an interface to the external world, right? The corporation is a way that the legal system, that the government system, that basically the social systems of today would recognize an entity as in a legal capacity. Right? The corporation is this unit of recognition
Right.
behind which we have so this is the interface.
And
there.
also their products are recognized in the form of commodity.
Right, like this is like the language that the outer world understands and all of that stuff, sort of stuff. So we call this the interface to the external world, but there's also an interface for the individual guild members, we would call them, the people who are in the system themselves, like how they perceive what they're doing. So there's another interface there, and and it has to do with the fact that this interface is perceived from the one's own intuition, as I was saying. This is that
Right.
this is that kind of interface rather than a legal one, where you have to navigate social standards and specific
So like
procedures.
the system being outside, and then we're talking
Yeah.
about kind of the model being inside.
So how to bridge intuition to function, and then that function to that interface we've already covered. So that's sort of the goal here, and that's sort of what we'll try to explain. So that internal interface, as we would like to call it, is a way for to take one's intuition and sort of form a lens around it, a view of how to perceive events, like not events, but how to perceive one's own relationship with surroundings. So it's more of like a static. Listed the description of things. It's not just a checklist, really. If you want to think of it that way, it's more of like a checklist. It works that way. And this checklist is what we refer to as guild dynamics. Guild dynamics is a small little representation of the model in the context of an individual and the group.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a matter of talking, a matter of interfacing with other people.
Right.
In a generic sense, not for a particular task, but in the generic sense of like how that should look. And,
So this
and
is
be formulated.
slightly different from any previous talks we've done about or discussion about kind of like the neural operating system and affect and all this kind of like really even more internal and sort of personal processing of things, of like the meaning of an object and this kind of stuff. Guild dynamics is definitely on that interface towards the outside, the shared, right?
Yeah, it's a bridge between that conversation and the one where we interact with other people, having that in mind already. So that's where guild dynamics
Other
really
people who are also functioning in the context of guild dynamics.
So there's like that inner DNA core, which we'll get into more explicitly because guild dynamics has an explicit, what we would could call a DNA core, which we call mediation in our model speak, as we call it. So yeah, so guild dynamics is really what is utilized as a form of mediation between people who are already bought into the idea of guild dynamics. It's the inner thought process that is shared amongst the group. It's not dictated one. It's simply it's one that stems directly from the perceptual mechanics that we've discussed earlier, with the abstractions and the different variations on the spectacle and the abstract face space and all of that and the minplex.
Right, and that's kind of like the shared medium, so to speak.
Yeah. So all of that. What does that resonate outwards?
This like triadic holonic approach to perception is the media. Even though that's kind of an internal thing, when it becomes shared among multiple people, you can do some really interesting stuff with it.
Right, and guild dynamics is a variation of that in that shared space. So instead of talking about internal objects and stuff like that, we're discussing on how people interact. The easiest way to start this conversation is to sort of explain the kind of guilds that we have, to create that structure. And so the easiest to explain will be what we call the proximity guilds. And proximity guilds are a way to represent the guild as a group of people. So on the one extreme, you basically have what we call the association guild. The association guild is essentially Brian and I are sitting here together. We're friends. We've decided to associate with each other. That association forms this current guild. As soon as we go our separate ways, so does the guild. So that's association guild. An association guild is a very transient. All guild.
All right. Just putting my monitor on. Don't mind me. Just want to see what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a simple. That's the simplest way to create a guild, is to associate with somebody. And when you associate with somebody, you are sharing some kind of ideal, right? Otherwise, why are you associated in any way? Language, for instance, is just simple stuff. Carrying on this idea, there's a more less liberal associations. So one is based on geographical location, being in the shared environment. Is also another kind of guild, because in that case you have a shared medium which you need to take care of. Bringing that a bit more closer, now you have a familial guilds, which are the associations with people with whom you cohabitate and live together with. So we're talking like not necessarily biological families, but basically families. People who choose to share the same living space, not just the same environment, but like the same house, the same, even the same beds, whatever.
Right. So if the floor gets dirty and needs to be swept, this is a common shared thing that you have multiple people being aware, and within their perception, within their experience, they're seeing this shared object of the floor. It needs maintenance, this kind of stuff. So you would say these people are in proximity, and this is just a way of we're modeling what's happening.
Yeah, so we have these gradients of proximity, and the last gradient is the loop back, which is basically the person as they perceive themselves, right? So it's not the person themselves that we are after in this schema, but rather the person's perception of themselves. So the things that you think about yourself is that thing that you're thinking about is the loop back, because you're treating yourself as another person within a group abstractly, right? You're seeing yourself as a component of something else, and you're reasoning about yourself as you would about something that's
Right.
outside of yourself.
Let's say you live you live alone, just to make it simple, and your floor is dirty. You are now, like, you make this process that, okay, that needs to be done. You're calculating your body as an object through space and time has to move and go and clean that up.
Yeah, you say to yourself, somebody should do this. You say to yourself, I should do this, and then you go get up and do yourself, right? So you're discussing you're discussing yourself to yourself as you're doing so, and that is why we call it the loop back. It loops right back to who's doing the thinking.
Yeah, it's kind of a networking term.
So it is a networking term. Yeah.
We use a lot of computer terms.
They seem to make sense and be straightforward. So why not? So yeah, so this is the last, the more extreme, the tightest proximity you can have is with yourself. So those are the 4 gradients that we have for the modeling, and the rest of guild dynamics really revolves around the fact that the people who model it this way happen to mediate themselves as members of this idea, right? And so,
right. Their communications would be isomorphic with that model,
right? And so because now it's a network that's mediated with members, we have what we call, these are the 3 fundamental guilds that have formed out of this, and one of them is the membership guild, one of them is the network guild, and one of them is the mediation guild. So that framework now forms the entire guild itself, and we are right back in having a archetype model guild situation happening again, like a full repetition of the holonic model on the shared layer instead of the internal neurological layer. It's now in the social operational layer.
Right.
So that's what we've done there. We've jumped to a different layer of operation, one that's social, and so that structure.
We do have a comment.
And so that structure is the structure of guild dynamics.
How do you consider multiplicity of self?
So a loop. So this is where you get different kinds of loop backs. So you don't necessarily think of yourself as a singular object either. This is kind of, I know it gets kind of trippy here, but you one thought about yourself, right, is not necessarily the same loop back as another thought about yourself, although they can be, but it's not necessary. And so what you can have is a situation where you think of yourself as 2 different people, right? And you have a conversation in your head between those scenarios, right? So like all of these kinds of things are also loop backs.
Like, let's say you're like, I don't know, just a boxer or a fighter or whatever, and you have a home gym. So you could be cleaning your floor, or you could be working out.
Yeah, so you can be your
have
own janitor, you can be your own cook, you're your own, right? So all of these are not necessarily the same guilds, right? So yeah, there's the correlation is not to a particular body or to a particular what you would call a legal individual, or like some sort of soul or anything like that. Like, these entities don't really factor into the explanation. So what I would say, if you want to start to like sort of try to understand how to think in this way, so take those questions out of the picture entirely and sort of just imagine loop backs, potentially splitting, cloning themselves, interacting with each other, but they're all the same person, right? Like, or different people, or like half the loop back is one person, the other half is another person. Like, you can have really crazy trippy stuff happening, specifically with the loop back, because it's not a reference to myself as an individual, but it's a reference to something that is reference in itself, and that could be like
Right.
on any scale.
Yeah, you're gonna have. I mean, people would have a lot of trouble conceptualizing that if they have that hard-coded self-identity, which
Yeah.
is labeled by their first, middle, and last name and their SSN or whatever, their SIN number.
Right. So we're moving away from that kind of thinking, from that line of thinking entirely, into saying there's such a thing as a loopback, which is a self-referential guild, the tightest little guild you can have, and an individual is potentially billions of them, right? So it's very, very difficult to assert an identity in this kind of schema, and that's by design. Something like identity is actually not something like identity is not vilified per se, but it's marginalized. It's definitely marginalized into a very small, narrow context.
Isn't there, though, still like identity, but
That's what I'm saying. It's marginalized. It's brought down from being like a fundamental, important aspect of to reason about,
Right.
to
But
it's-
not even
it's
marginalized.
It's a player in a bigger scheme of things.
there are just simply multiple identities, I think. It's,
There's identities, again, transient. It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't. It exists in a context.
Mhm.
Once the context is gone, the identity has no meaning.
Right.
And so.
Yeah.
And so, as different contexts arise and disappear, identity has this flux to it.
Right. So the identity wraps up the whole worldview of functionality of the context of what you're doing, and to make the thing happen.
Right. And so this gets into the proximity complex, because that's where it's coming from. Which again, in the proximity complex and the proximity guilds are mirrors of the same phenomena, where the proximity complex is trying to deal with phenomena in a raw sense, trying to place the self-reference
Yeah.
in a context of the phenomena in it or outside of it, just to understand where to move next.
Right.
This is saying basically, okay, what are the proximities? Like, what's the layout of my proximity? What's the map of those proximities right now?
Right.
That I can navigate.
Just trying to understand the objects and their relations and how to
Yeah.
move through them.
And then we just gave it a couple of gradients to help manage that, from the tightest to the loosest. And a couple in between, just because they occur within that gradient. Those are based on what we have, as far as I can tell.
Now, there's just one thing I wanted to point out about proximity guilds, and I don't know if there's a chart that we want to pull up for this, but just the fact that it kind of aligns with the concrete layer, right?
Yeah.
And that's important because when I think proximity, I think
Well, we were saying it's like a group and,
I
and
think
an
like
individual.
terrain, as far as our last discussions, like it's kind of you're in that it's this, what is happening right now, what is the world state, quote unquote, of happening right now? What are the objects that are actually
Yeah.
hitting your perception?
And in fact, this is the spectacular layer of objects if you just transform every object into a guild. Guild dynamics is the discussion of the spectacle, right, in the social, lifted to the social stratum
Yeah.
itself. So it definitely
You mean
matches that.
like to map objects to which guild takes care of that object?
No, I mean like the only things in existence are guilds, right? And that's the medium. So
Right.
only guilds like instead of words, right? Guilds. So how do guilds stick together? It's another language basically. It happens like this gets into the computation stuff with carriers and stuff. So let's not get too carried away with this.
Yeah.
But the idea being is that there's a huge parallel between those two layers. One of them being you can view the main players in the on the stage as just guilds.
So like sort of in the sense that identity is sort of a high level context which subsumes other objects into its context, like a couch or a broom to sweep the floor.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm not sure how to connect that thought, but that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the flow, I'm not sure of where.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how a broom is a guild.
Oh no,
Because you're saying that everything becomes a guild.
no. Broom would not be a guild.
Right. And that's where I
So
said,
so
like,
we eliminate the objects of like the utility objects from the stage and just focus on the players. Right. So it's not that the broom becomes a guild. It's just that how there's a guild utilizing brooms. There's a guild utilizing, you know what I mean?
Right.
So the broom is not the medium itself. The guild is. The broom moves through the medium of guilds.
Right.
It's very convoluted and abstract that way. So I'm not too keen on that particular way of
Yeah.
explaining.
No,
Right.
that makes sense. We have complexity rolling up to these top level kind of identities.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say here instead is that we have like these basic units, guilds, with which we can start to model things with. So in the context of your brooming and whatnot, it would be how a broom is utilized by guilds. Shared, not shared. Is there a guild surrounding this broom, or is there a guild surrounding all brooms? Creation and distribution and all that kind of stuff. So you can get into all of this, but it's all arbitrary. To the point that there's proximital guilds that are doing it.
Cool.
And
So-
like I said, those could be people and groups. In the simplest way to think about it, look at a guild. Look at any of these proximity guilds as either a person, a family, a town,
Right. We can also pull this.
a bunch of friends.
This one up here.
You know, like it's all sort of to cover those bases. And then, as I was saying, what you get is when you have buy-in into this view, right? You essentially have people who mediate themselves a certain way, right? By view of viewing everything as proximity guilds, for example, that's a form of self-mediation. If we share that mediation, right, we're basically members of this club, if you will, and just by that virtue. So that mediation forms like a DNA sort of code of conduct between those different proximities, and so the concept of this mediation is captured as another guild type, which we call fundamental. The concept of that networking between people who use this mediation is itself another fundamental guild called network. And the membership that arises from all of this is called the membership guild. So these three fundamental guilds are fundamental to all proximital guilds. Right? So proximity guilds. So then all proximity guilds belong to the network guild, are the network
Okay,
guild.
so we just we jumped up to so fundamental guilds here, right? I think you just went over explaining that. I wasn't really paying attention.
Yeah, so the network guild, the mediation, and the membership guilds, I was just explaining how, by virtue of being in the proximal guilds, i.e., being associated with somebody, being in the same town with somebody, being in the
Right.
same room with somebody, or living in the same room with somebody, or just being by yourself, if you have that view, if you mediate yourself through that view, anybody else mediating themselves through that view, right, you now share a kind of a special mediation core
Right.
between you two.
Right.
So that mediation core puts you makes you kind of like members of this special club, which is like so these three concepts: being in networking with somebody, having that mediation through that network, and then becoming a member of that network. All three together form what we call the fundamental guilds of the guild itself.
Right. And you kind of see an all or nothing effect here, too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like you have to like it's a co-arising sort of
Right.
situation, and so this brings us to, well, now that we have explicitly defined the network guild, the mediation guild, and the membership guild as a guild, well, we can talk about them as having responsibilities. The membership guild is really the responsibility of every member. It's basically like the self knowledge of you mediate yourself in the same way as every other member. That's basically that's the that's the primary
Right.
sort of focus of this guild, is to understand that,
And we're
comprehend
seeing-
this very, very much.
We're seeing the triad effect here as well. So membership being the archetype, mediation being model, and network being the guild. So network being the most concrete.
Right, the actual
aspect.
people,
Right.
the actual proximity guilds.
So
And mediation is the actual model being used to be in that network to begin with, which is why it's called,
Right.
which is why it is the model, and which is why it's the
Right.
mediation.
So we're kind of we're laying out a kind of overlay on top of, you could say, what is happening. This is a way of understanding how people interact with each other economically or otherwise, in some sort of intentional
Yeah, whether they're aware of it
society.
or not, this is the structure under
Right.
which it's happening. And really, the idea of making those guilds explicit is to just draw focus to these interactions explicitly and to model them. And by modeling
Right.
them, we have what we can mediate, and by mediating that, we actually have a context through which our activities can take place, rather than arbitrary numbers
Mm-hmm.
of tokens.
Yeah. There's
So this
when
is-
you're able to model something, you're able to keep track of it. You're able to do something much more intentionally and properly. And this is kind of the basis of how do we expect systems like the card box game and like the dashboard to
Yeah.
actually help society organize in a much better, more efficient, proper
Yeah.
way.
So to answer that rhetorical question, it's basically by having acknowledged this model explicitly within themselves, that they are working through it, and to sort of bring in the other facets of what's what is being discussed into the framework of this model that sees itself already, and because what you find is that it actually changes the significance of things. Certain things become less significant from this framework than others. In particular, things of desire, of the nature of desire, tend to have a lot less significance than the ones of necessity, and that is of an effect that we are actually after as well.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, folks, it's not about what you want, so much as it is what you should probably do.
Right.
And I'm
so
not,
in a roundabout way.
and I'm not going to say that from an authoritative perspective. It's more like you kind of probably realize this for yourself, the way I did for myself. That self-responsibility amounts to social responsibility and so
Right.
on and so forth, and it does have to start at a core.
Right.
With that said, I'm nobody to actually suggest that this is the correct way, except for the fact that it worked for me,
Right.
and a few others. But that's on that front. You always got to be careful about what
Yeah.
the relationship is there.
And you'll see reflections of this kind of work in almost any kind of religious system in which you find that
Yeah.
people doing simply what's responsible and necessary and community minded and all this.
I wouldn't
kind
say
of stuff.
religious as much as the idea of spiritual.
Fine, yeah.
And the reason I'm saying making that distinction is that the connotation of religion tends to have a more of a ordination going on, and a kind of like a certification program.
Right.
And we're not really trying to discuss that, but rather the intuitive understanding of living and just being.
Yeah,
Just,
so like the certification without the validation, I think, seems like is par for the course. Without an internal way of validating. So we need to be certified in validating certifications.
yeah,
To some like throw the loop in there.
Yeah, there's essentially there's a what we're not after is lip service, right? So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Religions are a lot about lip service rather than
Yeah, and I mean,
substance.
this all comes down to isomorphism and how the tree of life, so to speak, or the holonic stacking requires that awareness and responsibility of the whole. Otherwise, it collapses to entropy. This is simply how it is. Each layer,
It collapses to entropy through neglect.
right? Each layer needs to be keeping track or taking care of other layers, and it's been that way all the way up through biology and all this, up to the point of conscious awareness. And even in conscious awareness, there are layers which need to be formulated properly so that they are isomorphic with the whole yet again. So we see layers needing to be isomorphic with the whole all the way up until we get to an actual conscious experience. That conscious experience has to also be the same. And if it's not, the thing collapses. So it's like, you want to live or die? And it's like kind of black and white terms.
Yeah. So our perspective on authority is coming from the sort of seeing things from that.
Yeah.
The rest is essentially voluntary, obviously, but there's not a lot of wiggle room once
Right,
the
like
decision
that's-
is made.
I mean, that's all we can say is it works for us, and we can see clearly that that we're onto something, and that others have been onto something as well.
It's the same thing.
But this is the
really.
problem of seduction, I guess, of the participant, of the guest towards participant through the degrees of coherence, right?
Yeah, you get.
That's what we're bumping against right now.
Yeah, you get married to it. But let's get back on topic. So we have arrived at the fundamental guilds, which form the actual guild structure from the inner perspective rather than the external perspective that we've been covering so far with the institution and the corporation. So those are fulfilling the functional needs, like, you know, food production, toilet paper, whatever, whatever you need. So that was that part. So this is kind of more of a so we've covered an entire mental model that drives those needs to begin with. Now we need a social model to interact with people that are doing these things. And
Right.
this is really where this conversation is coming to. So
Right.
so we start off with this idea of fundamental guilds, which is the idea of membership, the idea of mediation, and the idea of networking. And so clearly those things this triad is happening all at once due to the configuration that we're discussing. And so every single guild member as it were, understands that they're part of the membership guild, and its activities, understand that they are part of the mediation guild and its activities, and understand that they're part of the network guild and its activities.
This is also a multiplicity of identities. Sorry, not to.
Yeah, no,
interject.
that's fine. That's actually a good point. And so that's kind of like why they're called fundamental, in that this is a fundamental comprehension that you have to have. And then
Right, and fundamental itself being the archetype. So we're in the mimetic sort of layer here.
yeah, and so with that, you got two givens and one sort of murky. You have your membership that's a given, you have your networking that's a given due to the proximities, right? But mediation outside of the vagueness of thinking about it this way is still kind of not a given. So this is kind of so mediation is really the meat and potatoes, if you will, of guild dynamics, of how it's all held as a single unified guild, and what makes it the guild rather than this guild versus that guild versus the other guild. It's always the guild. It doesn't matter who's running which institution. It's the same people as far as the guild is concerned. What you would have is different qualities, but you would not have different guilds. So all that said, we could probably move the picture slightly up now. So because this is where we get into mediation itself, which is elaborated through the natural guilds. Yeah.
Right, so we start at the bottom, typically, and the last video we went into this. A lot,
Yeah. So what you'll notice is that the corporation discussion that we've had, in terms of resolving problems and in terms of modeling problems, is actually using guild dynamics for its functions. So what do I mean by that? Guild dynamics is this stack of guilds. The way they're designed, they are a set of constraints, basically. They're not there to say how you should do stuff. They're there to say, okay, but have you considered? Okay, but have you considered? Okay, but have you considered? Right? And so, and anytime you want to do any kind of function, you got to go down through this stack of guilds and basically be like, okay, so how is it taking care of these concerns? How is it taking care of those concerns? And the lower the guild on this stack, the more fundamental are the concerns it needs to be taken care of. So you can see that education and immunity are very, very, very much at the bottom. So why is education at the bottom? Because if you aren't aware of any of how things are put together, right? If you're not constantly modeling these things to begin with, you've got nothing to keep track of. So education has that spot simply because it's the bridge between action and awareness of action, right? And education really is to illuminate the natural guild to whoever's being mediated. So literally, education is about education, immunity, environment, technology, data. It's about this stack. So it's a self-representation, and immunity is again at the bottom because you can't do much if you're dead.
And we have this sort of stacking phenomenon where where you're going from bottom to top, but you never let go of what's at the bottom. The fundamental is always existing in those.
Yeah, you once you move up a stage, you're actually just revamping what you've just been doing in a more elaborate way. So environment is more about immunity than the environment. So it's about immunity in the context of environment, right? And so that feeds back into taking care of the environment as the environment takes care of you. That relationship is acknowledged by that guild. And so that's why we have an entire guild surrounding that concept, right? But when it comes down to it, if you have to choose between life and death or preserving piece of in the environment, our position is that you choose immunity first, right? And like you prioritize the fundamentals more.
Right, or to sacrifice the model view of something while interacting with the environment. You don't want to do that.
Right.
Right. You want to make, well, yeah. I think that's a valid
Like
point.
you basically, if you have questions about like how to not become a doormat, this kind of stacking is actually points towards how to approach it. You focus more on industry than on diplomacy. You focus more on economy than on industry. You focus more on your facts than on how you've used them so far. Like these,
Right.
the higher the guild, the more delayed the problem can be. It doesn't mean that it should be ignored, because the fundamental view is that we have to have a grandmaster at every level to have a guild, hyperstitiously speaking, if you will. Like there is a grandmaster who is knowledgeable apparently in every single guild. So there should not be a situation where something is lacking in that sense. Like we're not giving up the stack. It's just that when you're faced with a situation, there's certain things that are more prioritized than others. So that's kind of part of that. It's not the most important aspect of it, but it's definitely is important. The more important aspect of it is the coalescence of these different guilds into a single unified understanding of activity, which again boils down to education. That never leaves that space.
Yep.
So this would be the natural guild stack, and it's the fundamental core of mediating the guild from the internal perspective, taking aside the question of demands and supplies, like who's responsible for which is what corporations and the institution is supposed to are really for. If you take those outside, right, and you look at, well, who is involved, who are all the shareholders, who are all the members of this huge array of networked corporations, if you will. Those, like, what unifies them together as a whole, as a culture, if you will. Any of those words, just pick them. It's this guild dynamic.
Yeah, the quality of the media, kind of the mediation.
Yeah, the guild dynamics is what you will be seeing from the inside of that.
Yep. So I guess that kind of ties this all back to the question of, so the inner workings of these corporations, of how they're fulfilling, is that we're taking this type of whatever the problem is, whatever the task is, whatever the environment, we're applying this type of a stack of understanding to make sure that we've got all the bases covered to properly do that.
Right.
Activity.
So if you recall, our corporations would have people who are so let's say masters of these specific guilds in certain spots, right? And they would have to be qualified in data or economy or industry or diplomacy or trade or any of those different things, or computing sometimes, to be able to actually be in a corporation. So you have to go through this stack as a sort of a qualifier,
right,
to have anything to do with
right,
with the actual inner workings of a corporation as we would recognize one.
Right. So we're kind of imagining, like, so you've got the institution makes a, what do you call it, initiative to have something is required, something is requested. The corporation has a kind of domain of behavior to fulfill that.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be all kinds of different things that need to happen to
constrain that
within the internal of the corporate workings to take care of the model. So the mediation, this is the mediation, the model, the model of like the corporate brain of what it's thinking. Okay, well, I need to keep track of this, so that's data. I need to keep track of this. I need to exchange materials with another corporation, so you need trade, right? Diplomacy.
Yeah.
So you've got people who are expert at diplomacy and trade, they're your PR people and whatever, right? And
Yep.
and they're making it happen so that this corporation can fulfill that need.
Yeah. Yeah, we could potentially pull up that chart later on to, like, if we're gonna keep hammering at that, then we should probably pull up those two spreadsheets to show the relationships. But for now, I kind of want to jump into to the internal view still, and say, okay, so
Right.
now we have established these fundamental guilds. Now that we've established the details of each list, so we have the fundamental guilds being members, network, and mediation. We have this stack for natural guilds, and then we have loop back, geographical, familial, and just association for the other ones. Okay, so now so we have all of these different pictures of guilds. What does the landscape look like to a member seeing all of this? So this is where I had that image, the old image for Guild Dynamics pulled up.
Right.
So if we
Here we
look at
go.
that, this is sort of the picture that we'll get. And if you'd like to explain it again, because you explained it so well last time.
Did I?
Because you can actually refer back to the previous picture with since you have all the details in the other in the list picture,
Right.
right?
Well, I did create this image after all.
Exactly. So you can just maybe just go over as to how what I just said fits into this picture.
You want to take a quick break? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just talking a lot.
But yeah, so each dot we've got a loop back. So this is representing an individual. Each encircled area here, we've got a bunch of kind of globulous circles encompassing a bunch of different individuals. Is the proximity. So they're relating to each other in a certain way, in an intentional way. That intentional way is represented by this this model stack here, this tripart
Which represents the fundamental guilds.
piece here, yeah, the fundamental. So we've got within that your proximal, your natural, your fundamental.
Which are the fundamental guilds.
Right. So then if you look into the details of this on the right side of the chart, fundamental, we have three strips. Those are representing itself, basically, the three strips of this. The natural stack being, this is the mediation, all the different details of how
That's the same list that you've just seen on the other page.
Right.
That's the immunity, environment, all of those. That's that guild.
So in the middle, it's kind of the glue that's holding together the operations of either these people or these people in their proximity.
And depends on who is in proximity. You will have different qualities to the mediation, right? Like somebody will be more knowledgeable in environment than somebody else, for example. So depending on who's getting together, the quality of that proximity of the mediation stack is going to be it's going to have a different gradient to it, right? So, different coherence. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Go on.
So where were we going then with all that?
Well, maybe the fact that it's all transient. This isn't like a permanent picture, for example. Like all of these
Right.
relationships change in seconds. That, for example, what you can also, the idea that because different associations have different quality aspects, like different coherence aspects, if you have more associations, you kind of get a more complete picture, right? So there's that.
Right, that you're like your connection to the network.
Yeah, there's that effect to it. That you can get more or less coherent with this model
Right.
by simply how the proximities are combined and who's got what.
And so as you would
who brings what to the table.
as you would expect, we can offload functionality out into the network itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another key.
Yep, and these things all being in flux and changing here and there, and I guess you could almost see the proximity as different identities.
Yeah.
So you're at one identity or another identity, depending on which proximity. So
That's
like
why loopback is a proximity as well. Right, you can have a circle of just one.
Yep, which we don't have here. Oh no, it's incomplete.
You don't have loners?
We don't have loners. Well, what do you say we take like 5-minute break here?
Yeah.
Just get a little stretch out there. How long? What are we at? 1 hour. We're almost an hour. Well, that's cool. So where are we going to go right after when we get back? Let's just... so how far have we got? We kind of like laid out a little bit of a game plan here as to where we're going with this.
Yeah, so we tackled mediation just now, which we just showed how it's the natural guilds here. We can sort of relay this back now.
Right.
Because
Back
now we've done full circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like there's
Yeah. This is a
time.
reflection of what we did last time, basically with the computational economics.
So the tangent is really to sort of create another loop inside as to where this is all kind of coming from,
So
how things are connected, and other aspects.
We're
too.
gonna kind of try to get back to that quickly. The
computation.
yeah, about the carriers and like embedding carriers. Is that no?
And we're embedding domain modeling into carrier modeling.
Right. Yeah, the whole thing that we did last time.
Try to kind of tackle it for reals this time.
Right.
It's convoluted, but it's necessary. It's top tier guild dynamics too. So
Right. And so like if you want to facilitate these corporations with like the card game, you're gonna have to know this greater kind of context, how everything is sort of depending on and interlinking with it every other thing. If we didn't do this, the way that we would go about doing the card game would be very isolated thinking.
it would be just an arbitrary game
Yeah,
that speaks to a
like-
small crowd.
Okay, I've got this is our objective. Okay, let's lay out the cards and all that, right? So
Yeah, we have enough systems like that already anyway.
right.
This is almost that, but not quite.
Right. Cool. So we will be right back in about 5. Catch you then.
conceptualization.
For fun's sake.
And a complete divergence from the scepter is like scepter only accepts a single reality as a truth. It doesn't matter how much of it you have, right? The truth is only a single layer. So if it's either you can share it and not share it, but
You mean from an individual perspective, or what?
from what data is what's considered valid data. Where
I didn't know that. I thought Scepter holochain was the same.
So basically, like if you have a holochain going,
Yeah.
you can only have a chain, right? If you fork the chain anywhere, this fork becomes illegitimate. Right?
But isn't that
What
the way
what-
that a proximity guild would work, anyways? Having a
But see, but that's where I'm different in my thinking. I don't think that this should be an illegitimate fork. I think that this should be an imaginary fork, but not an illegitimate one.
right.
So you can actually take an event, fork a bunch of different scenarios out of it in the imagination land,
Mhm.
use a calculation for a heuristic to select a good one, try it out, see how it works, try something else out based on that, shit like that. This something that
Yeah, this is what you mentioned something before that.
Yeah, so
You said like this is an addition that you didn't see that it was accounted for within the Scepter framework.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And I would definitely want that to be incorporated. I don't want just because something was not something. Say if you have a private thought, right? If you have a private thought, and then you say a public thought, which is validated by your private thought. I don't have to always validate your private thoughts in order to validate your other thoughts, right? Like it's just that's an insane fucking trajectory to take. This doesn't work in real life at all.
I don't get the example.
In order for a legit piece of data to be legitimate, the piece of data before it has to be public. And so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. Not the data itself, but its hash, right? I'm saying, no, it doesn't. You don't have to have the entire history. You can simply say, okay, this particular history is imaginary. Like, it hasn't been verified with any other criteria.
Right.
But you can then take that and compare it to other heuristics and validate it that way. Outside of that, outside of the original scoping chain,
Right.
based on its merit rather than its
okay.
origin.
So this kind of seems like taking a different view of the roots of data and the roots of these holochains as being
So you can have
wider.
an imaginary version of a holochain, and that's why I call them holotrees instead.
holotrees. You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah. As far as holochain goes, they're just trying to recreate the current ecosystem, but because it's already the current ecosystem, like nothing is added to it. If we start with the dashboard, then we already have exactly what everybody's going to be using it for. Right? Like, especially once you get to the data entry and the programming part. It's an IDE, man.
I don't know that. Yeah, that sounds weird. I don't know if we're maybe way off topic, but it seems like innovative to me that the agent-centric idea that this is the idea that everything's calculated from your perspective in the network, right? But in still in a way that's quote unquote blockchain verifiable throughout the network.
Holochain.
Right. It's the technology. Yeah.
There's no ledger.
Right. People understand, I think, blockchain, the term blockchain.
Yeah. It's similar but different. Can I turn this?
Sure, yeah. Yep. Perfect. Yeah, so I don't know what you mean by that they're just doing the same,
You don't know what I mean by sorry?
that they're just doing what's already there or something.
So Holochain right now, all they have is basically a repository of a couple of apps. And those apps are basically just chat clones and Facebook clones and Twitter clones and
Right.
whatever clones. So basically,
Which is understandable.
they've recreated the entire ecosystem that already exists.
Oh, you mean
but
they
nobody
don't have
needs
the
it.
dashboard?
But nobody needs it. Like, we already have Facebook, we already have Twitter, we already have all this shit. Nobody's gonna use Holochain as a fucking substitute just because it's a great idea. Like,
I bet if you, so those are proofs of concept, but I bet if you looked into the ecosystem, there are probably many apps and many app ideas that, that approach what we're looking at.
For sure, but like, we're talking about the same situation that we had, 50 years ago now with GNU. When was GNU a thing? 70s or 80s?
I don't know.
Anyway, Richard Stallman, all that jazz, Free Software Foundation, again, tried to recreate Unix, right? I mean, had a fundamental success, right? In the sense that, yeah, there's another operating system out there, but it got swallowed right up into the ecosystem. It's part of a whole. It's not the defining thing that everything is running on. It's just one more thing out there, and this is what's going to happen to Holochain this way.
Fine.
It's just going to be one more thing, and not necessarily as big as Linux either.
Yeah.
And in fact, GNU is not the thing that made GNU itself. Linux was, and Linux was a different story.
And so the part, maybe pointing towards the part that's missing, which we talked about probably a year or two ago, is that we're kind of trying to provide the cognitive loop, which is not provided by Holochain. So the cognitive loop can still be this strict identity, organizational, hierarchical shitstorm, and yet it's using Holochain agent-centric.
Yeah,
and it's still the same thing.
Well, it's basically like humanity 2.0 is in that sense. We are agent-centric. We are all of these things to begin with, and yet we're using it to do what? Make money?
Maximize profits.
Yeah. So it's the same. It's just a repetition of the same story,
right?
And we don't want that.
But what we love about Holochain, Scepter, and all that is that it brings this isomorphism into the technology stack.
Yeah.
Right. That a properly aligned cognitive stack can utilize.
Exactly. I think that was definitely a step in the right direction in identifying the landscape as a bunch of agents, talking to each other rather than a bunch of calculations returning values, right? Because value, I mean, is such an arbitrary thing to an agent. An agent can take a value and recognize it as manure, or, like, that doesn't. It's arbitrary, is the point.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't really rely on turning it back to that
So
system.
we need the if the loop is broken, the loop is broken. Period. That's all it is. If you break the loop somewhere, it's still broken.
Cool.
Yeah. So where were we, anyways? That was a cool little aside. Much enjoyed.
Well, we're actually in that scene anyway, because we're going right back into computation, simply because if we take a look at our image,
this one.
If we look at our image and we look at the top 3 natural guilds, we will see sentient machine, synthetic neural computation, or computing, and which was the very beginning, the subject of
so this
previous
is a good topic, previous video, but also where does Scepter slot in here, under computing or
under synthetic neural computing?
Yeah.
So so Scepter's core papers and stuff like that had a lot of influence on that guild structure. It had fundamental influence on the entire idea of guild dynamics, because the receptor setup, virtual machine and networking machine is actually where the idea of fundamental guilds is stemmed from. So that loop back, sort of that strange loop that they've created is is been
Where there's a model of the
inspiration.
network within the
Network.
virtual machine, right? That sees the
Yeah,
network.
and a model of the virtual machine inside the network.
Right.
So with that, that's how we arrived at Fundamental Guilds to begin with, and so there's a lot of parallels there, a lot of cross pollination.
Yeah.
Well, no, we never pollinated them in any sense.
Well, that's tough. That's tough when you feel like you don't quite have a product yet, and all this kind of stuff. Although we did kind of try, but it just wasn't coherent enough.
Yep.
We didn't have the guild system at all. I know we tried to like show some parts of how guild dynamics could work within their organization. Like there was kind of that, there was almost an attempt, but it just, we weren't even ready for it. So
Yeah. So there's the connection with Scepter there. The other connection is the actual model behind synthetic neural computing. I think that for the most part, Scepter has it very, very correct. A few things I feel are not quite. They're very small, actually. They're there. I wouldn't have arrived at that thought even unless they have arrived at theirs first. So it's entirely built on top of their prowess, so to speak.
Credit where it's due.
Yeah. So the thing I think they kind of didn't quite get correctly. That's just, again, this is my opinion. I'm a strongly opinionated person, and that's what it is. It's an opinion. I don't understand why they've opted for a single source of truth layer in the sense of their DHT, their distributed hash tree. They only have one per application kind of thing, where I feel like it should be one per association. If you have an association, a mutual association with something, you have a kind of like a tree of knowledge that's shared.
Right.
I think it's
Even in the moment, truth in the
Yeah.
moment kind of thing.
I believe that those things need to be transient in nature and rebuilt as necessary, not a source of truth in itself, but a reference point. So, that's one of my main contentions with the way they've framed everything. And the second one is that I kind of think that memory itself is a type of a carrier rather than a database. So what do I mean by that? I think memory is something that is triggered in response to stimulus rather than a request for data.
Right. So it's alive. Memory is alive.
Right. So basically, like something happens, and because it is like something already in memory starts to feed into the process of how to interpret whatever is happening, and that relationship is very different right now with regular computing, where you just directly associate data with some value, like with keys and all of that. So
Yeah. Doesn't this get into like the what do you call it? The trees and all that, like where data
Yeah.
is part of a structure.
Yeah. That's
Right.
that's the entire semantic tree
Yeah.
idea, which again, Scepter's credit is where it's due. This is a Scepter idea. I just expanded slightly on everything that they've done. Yeah, one of these things is the way the memory is actually feeding back into the process, because I don't believe that the neural networks in biology would actually retain actual databases with key value retrieval systems.
It's
weird.
disconnected.
It's a weird abstraction on top of, it's a necessary abstraction for computing, but not synthetic neural computing. So that's the takeaway there.
Right.
I can't really think of any other differences that I have thought of since then. But those would be generally the couple of things that the trees shared between individual systems are not sources of truth, but transient understandings at the time. And so, like, for instance, a tree could be set up to create a specific way to interpret a problem. The two things communicated using that information, but as soon as that problem disappears, the context disappears, and those trees, if they were to, and those systems, if they were to try to reinterpret the same things, they would use other pieces of knowledge to feed them that data, and they would get completely different answers out of it. So, just things like that become possible if you stop treating these things as permanent. I think that's my contention. Nothing is permanent in my Buddhist sensibilities, and so when I saw that happen in Scepter, I kind of twisted
and every
and
context,
groaned.
every new situation pulls in the old context, but it's a new context.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is why I'm in favor of imaginary hology trade. Like, nobody else verified this, but the piece of knowledge is confirmed by its coherence, essentially. This is why coherence is becoming a thing as a concept. It's like it's a different arc of evaluation on something that happens, or if it's something that originated somewhere else, right? It's a way to bring two value systems together, if you will. Yeah,
cool.
I think that's what it is. It really is about taking arbitrary value systems and making it into a more
right. And there's that sort of active, like, this is the sentient machine. I think is probably like the most active arbiter of that coherence, whether something is or not.
I don't know if it's obvious, but in our rhetoric right now, the way we're talking about sentient machines and the way we're talking about synthetic neural computation, then that most people, ourselves included, land in the boat of being a synthetic neural computer, and basically no better than an AI bot, with maybe a few incidental leaps into the sentient machine sort of
right
processing, but never really staying there long enough to make use of it in any capacity. So take what you want away from that. We're all basically robots.
In most cases.
In most contexts.
In most contexts. Yep. And that gets back to that kind of spirituality comment.
Well, I don't want to paint the picture that, like, the hippie picture of, like, oh, we're free spirits and blah blah blah. Where it's like we have this total freedom, where we clearly are have mechanics to our bodies.
It's an inner coherence, an inner investigation to the very point where you are self-reflexive to such an extreme.
Yeah.
That it's almost incomprehensible.
Which is actually, interestingly enough, also the subject of Sentient Machine Guild, which looks at computation or computing. It looks at synthetic neural computing in that context, and the bridge between the two, when one does the other and uses the other to do the one back in return. When you have that happening, you get a sentience. Sentience here is basically defined very, very technically. I have a nice little diagram drawn that I can't really transpose here, but I would like to kind of explain. Do you have any ideas on how to do that, Brian?
How to transpose it?
How to get this into words? Because that's what I was trying to do last time, and this is where we got lost in terms of trying to say it in a way that makes sense.
No.
Because
no, I don't.
You can see how I took this, took that, embedded this into that, took this, used this to model that, then embedded this into what I just modeled, right? And then taking the process and then taking the process of modeling that to be yet another model. Yeah, see, again, it's impossible to actually convey in words. The picture makes sense. I think we'll skip that explanation for now, just because.
Fine. Yep.
Just because it's not going to happen. I don't
Right.
think it's going to be clarified by me just talking about it. I'll try to come up with a better diagram for all our good folks, and we'll actually display this thought process later.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, it does make sense. I've kind of confirmed it with you already.
Well,
Right?
it's what we went over last time.
We-
Just the sort of embedding,
Yeah.
I guess,
So-
the 3 layers.
This derived, then this embedded in, and then the fact that it's embedded in gets embedded in, and that together is the final product. Anyway, I will diagram this out, but the point being is that with a couple of embeddings in a certain way, you basically get to a point of not just having a neural synthetic computation, as we were saying, like we're all bots kind of a deal, but you get to that point of sentience, and that point of sentience is self-awareness, and that point of sentience is a slightly different position than being a mechanical sort of a robot, right? It's still a machine, but not in the sense like I'm not trying to describe a dead thing so much as a living, breathing machinery. It's hard to say that biology is not mechanical. Therefore, that's kind of where that thought is coming from. So
Right.
we're talking about like body mechanics, brain mechanics. Like it
Right.
is a
There's
machine.
this order is built up
Yeah.
from the bottom to the top. Bottom to the top.
But this machine is sentient. Sentient being meaning self-aware, makes decisions over self. Whatever you would associate with being self-aware. That's the thought behind it. And funny enough, it also fits really well together with the idea of AI and all of that jazz, because that's what we're
Right.
trying to do, mimic in the real computing world. We're trying to mimic the kind of machinery that our
Right.
biology is producing, and so together, sentient machine just seems to make sense, both in the sense that we are sentient machines. Society as a whole
Right.
can be thought of
The-
as a machine that is sentient.
Sentient seems
Or-
to mean self-aware,
Yeah.
right?
Our
And-
society isn't necessarily sentient.
And
Yeah,
to put that the idea of self-awareness in the context of this model where we're building kind of a system where things happen structurally and computationally, sort of, as an overlay of what biology is doing, sentience, self-awareness, that's
it's taking those
very complicated type of high level. This is the highest level of the stack, right?
Yep.
If we go there.
Yeah, and there's a reason there's no more. There's a reason why there's no more natural guilds. There's a reason why the state is the last primordial archetype. Like these little horizons are not there arbitrarily. They're there because the concern of these models stop there.
At the point of awareness of the whole, so the top to bottom whole, the sentient self-awareness. What is self? Self is this. Self is all of this entire stack, everything we've discussed about, right? That
And-
ability to self-reflect.
And we're not talking about self, the philosophical self, blah, blah, blah. We're talking about the thing that is referencing itself.
Right.
So we have a calculation
That's
going on, and the
structure
calculation
that builds up to the point where you have a self-view looking
Well,
at.
I'll simplify it.
Try.
You have a calculation going on, and one of the symbols inside that calculation is a reference to the calculation itself.
Right.
So this calculation
Yeah.
is like, oh, so what do I do with?
And that calculation is
Calculating it.
embedded in this whole structure, right? So that self calculation is actually unfolds fractally to the whole thing,
Recursively.
recursively.
Fractals are recursive. Yeah.
Fine, recursively.
Yeah, that's the basics of recursion, actually, like mathematically and
So,
whatnot.
long story short, we probably don't need to get into that.
No, but this
now.
is parts. All of these things are very much related, very much based on it. Guild dynamics and the idea of the signal symbol and all of that comes from formal systems to begin with. So there's a lot of actual mathematical background here that's not the focus. Yeah.
Right. Yep. And that's kind of like the crowning achievement. I called it, but it's, you know, as far as being able to describe in some way, it's the top.
Yeah. So the state of things, the sentient machine, those are
Right.
all crowning situations.
Mm-hmm. Even identity.
Yeah, well, exactly. An identity is the arrival at, is what like, identity is what, like, oh, if I'm this, then my role is,
Right.
right? Like it just
ident-
trickles down right away.
An identity has a context. The whole. This is how you're apprehending the world around you.
This relates back to why the key system, the lottery key ego system, lottery key system is kind of weird that way because of it. Different subject, but important. An important relationship.
Cool.
Yeah. So, if we're not going to discuss the embedding, then I think we should at least move to saying, okay, so the computation is.
So wait, we did kind of discuss the embedding. So our whole arc that we came to is this the guild dynamics thing. These fundamental guilds that we were discussing, where you have these proximity guilds, right? That's kind of your network, and within that you're having this mediation layer, which is how you're relating, which is the
which makes it a network to begin with.
Right. And so like this whole wrapped up this triad of network, mediation, membership,
And then
fundamental guilds.
and membership just means
Right.
now you belong to that network because of that mediation.
Right. Yeah, so this is already that kind of slotting in one into the other of context, that this is you and me relating, but we are utilizing all kinds of different ways of
We're in a network.
Creating
We're in the mediation.
products.
We're in the
Right.
membership. Yeah.
We're making a live stream. We're communicating various
Mhm.
different words and even languages, you could say. So that kind of related back to computation. The
domain. Yeah,
this
like
what we're
the
what
language.
we're trying to get into. So this kind of brings it all back.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, if we are modeled, can you move the screen down a bit? Yeah. So if we are modeled after the synthetic neural computing, and we're doing this kind of like laying out of the guild dynamics, this is the other, this is the other thing. Well, we're actually embedding the computing model of creating
Right.
this language inside of the synthetic neural computing. We're basically taking a language and giving it to the sentient, not the sentient, the agency. Like if we are, let's just for the sake of argument pretend we're the AI bots for a second. If we are the AI bots, each of us individually, and we're given this new language to learn, and we learn this new language, well, all of a sudden we've embedded this entire layer of how to do it inside our system, right? So, but just by doing it ourselves, we're actually creating a situation where AI learns about how to model, right? So
Mhm.
by learning about modeling, the AI learns how to model. So now,
Right.
and now if we get
Fundamental guilds.
and now, if we get that idea of modeling to model sentient neural computing, well, now you've got this inner layer
Synthetic
embedded
neural?
in. Yeah.
Synthetic neural.
Now we got this inner layer of computing that's embedded inside the synthetic neural computing, doing the modeling of synthetic neural computing in itself. And when it does that, you got the switch of now you've got enough modeling in there to actually be sentient. And this is what we define as the sentient machine.
Mm-hmm.
These two layers of computing and synthetic neural computing being embedded, of first created. First, you have to create the synthetic neural computing language out of computing, and then you have to embed computing back into that language. And once you do that, you get the sentience part, because it now models itself. Or rather, it needs to model itself within that language. That's the missing step. So that's the hardest part to explain about it. But if you think about it, more simply, when you're learning computing, you're embedding the computer model inside a synthetic neural computing model. You're actually doing that, and becoming aware of that, right? That there is a synthetic neural computing model that has been embedded into that particular awareness is sentience. That's the embedding that we're talking about. If you try to maybe rerun that explanation a couple of times before it makes sense, but I think I got the sequence right on that one. Cheers.
Damn.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, so we're trying to bring that level of coherence of isomorphism, where you are understanding the model of yourself and the modeling of what's going on, into all these organizational contexts of corporations.
Oh yeah,
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So in the way we had it set up is that the people doing initiatives, the people doing fulfillment, right, have to have qualifications from this stack. Right, they have to be versed in this stack, and some of it I don't think any of it goes into synthetic neural computing, because I mean that's insane. But computing is like researchers and all of them. They need computing.
Right. Do you mean as far as what the corporation has to take care of?
So you have
In
those.
the layering?
So we have the corporate stack, right? Archetype stack, the slots of which
Right.
things can be fulfilled in. So to fill in that slot, you have to have these guilds.
For each.
Yeah. So you have qualifications for each individual one.
But then you were saying that these would not be accounted for at the top?
They're not used in any of the qualifiers. So computing is as high as the corporate and the institute goes.
So there's basically no way to qualify that. Is that what you're saying? Or?
There's no specific corporation or institution function where you have to have those specific skills, but those specific skills wind up
Right.
being necessary for coming up with initiatives, coming up with fulfillments, and all of that stuff. So you still have grand masters, because executives, directors, architects, and engineers all have to have grand mastery behind them. They will not necessarily be judged based on their presence in these guilds. Their presence is going to be judged based on up to computing itself. So they can model domains.
It seems really hard to judge that, though, and as well to provide that as a service to
What kind of service would it be?
Right.
Like so that's it's a very theoretical kind of like academic kind of study, whereas computing is going to be the applicable aspect of it.
Be right back, ladies and gentlemen. unmutinated.
Yeah.
The mutiny has ended. Order restored.
Orderly conduct.
Yeah, so that kind of, yeah, that makes sense.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Or does it?
Kind of makes sense. No, like why those top pieces wouldn't be something provided to the corporation as a part of something
Yeah, those are
service within the corp.
Those are more like self-awareness types of. So that kind of stuff might be necessary
Because it's not computational.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The domain isn't computational.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff might be necessary for an actual AI kind of company, if you were to actually design a synthetic
That's
intelligence.
That's pretty far off, but computing is all that we need for a corporation and an economy. And all
Yeah,
this
to be
kind of
able to
stuff.
place a language around a problem, to be able to use that language to describe the problem, and therefore the solution behind it, and contextualize
Right.
it and everything like that.
Yeah.
So that's
The corporation is a kind of a dumb thing in that way. It's the inner experience of the.
Well, it is a
individual,
synthetic
which is-
neural network, right? It is a synthetic neural network. That's what a corporation is. It's not a sentient machine. It's a synthetic neural network in and of itself. And so we're embedding computing into it, and then we're embedding various models into it. It's the institute itself that has the sentient machine embedded, has the synthetic neural
Right.
thing embedded into its computing model itself. So
Excuse
that's
me.
where that's covered, right? And that's where you have. But the institute, the institution, if you recall, is ran by the Grand Master. The Grand Master is not a corporate entity.
Right.
So there is like
Mm-hmm.
an inversion of control.
So
there.
this is the model and system dichotomy as well showing up here.
Yeah, it's always going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and we're not working against it; we're working with it, right? So there you go.
Right.
Put it in place. All right. So.
Good.
So that's covered. Embedding is covered. We bridged last conversation into it. The only thing I think we don't have anything past this.
Nope.
The only thing I think that's left out is again the products, and we've never really circled back to.
Right. So we were kind of going to talk about the inner experience of what an individual does to actually make a corporation happen. Right. And that's how we were bridging to the products.
Right, where the demand comes from. So the first, of course, demand is the person. The second demand layer would be the corporation, and the third demand layer will be the institution. All of these have demands. So the products that we're
Are you
thinking-
talking about the archetype stack? You're referencing that?
Yeah. All of these have their.
Right.
Each one of their stacks is a list of demands. Right?
Mhm.
So this is kind of where we're moving off of from, but we haven't really materialized the actual set of products. We have a couple of concrete ideas, and I think this is kind of where we're stuck so far. Like, I believe that
We're
that's
probably right on the precipice of
So-
that.
One thought I had was basically our current associations and where they fit into a meta product. So the associations I came up with were Portal Mountain, right? SOTS, the transition, something else. Oh, that it was mentioned in our chat. Some group Eon stumbled into. Do you remember
Oh,
that?
the System 23.
Yeah, that thing. So I kind of had those laid out as the meta products, kind of like
Right.
community types, basically.
And this was organized in Triad Protocol.
Yeah.
HDMA.
That's actually why it struck me as a thing, because I was sort of seeing the triad in there.
Right.
So they all fulfilled. So they were communities actually, not products. So they all fulfilled certain aspects of different temperament.
Mhm. So we're kind of reaching out into the world, the community, our network, and seeing which pieces sort of fulfill.
So I think our meta products are actually networks, different kinds of networks, out of which we can build from. So
Right.
I haven't progressed through this thought process yet myself, and I haven't discussed it with anybody yet beyond right now. But that's really, I think this is really where the thinking is going to take us, since that is a far more. It
Right.
just looks like a far more
That's-
appropriate line of
That's holistic.
of tackling the problem.
If you think
not-
of it in terms of networks, you already have the whole triad in there.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure where the disconnect happened last time in terms of formulating this. I think we were too focused on product as a word, but I think product as a network also works.
Right.
So if that's the product we were trying to bring, so we were trying to bring this kind of community out,
Mhm.
that kind of community out, this kind of
Yes.
community out, and that kind of community
As you
out.
would expect. So this, instead of just a product as being a dead
And they're all the
thing,
same community, by the way. Don't get me wrong here.
instead of a product being a dead thing, the product is part
people.
of a movement of,
Yeah.
of hyperstition.
Yeah, and so to bring this back home a little bit, what the fuck are we talking about? So the community Ian mentioned struck me as a kind of a hyperstitious, sort of hyper reality.
So System 23 was like an ARG, alternate reality game,
Yeah.
focused.
Yeah, it's a matter of taking your worldview, twisting it deliberately, and working through whatever. It's a lot of mental gymnastics is what it comes down to. Then I brought up a SOTS community. SOTS is like they're unified in that they agree on something, but they're nothing past that. They're sort of it's a community that is in general agreement over an issue of some sort, and they identify through that, right? It's important for them. It's something fundamental to them, I guess, and so that's why they're bound together in that community. But beyond that, it doesn't have a lot of.
It wasn't called System 23. It
It's
was
okay.
something else 23.
That's fine.
I'll find it.
Eon. what
Yeah,
do you-
go ahead. So SOTS, like we're shoehorning stuff into this.
Oh yeah, this is a completely like a rough conceptual map for
Virus
from our
23?
yeah virus. It was virus.
Okay, so this was your comment here.
Yeah, there it is. So again, this is shoehorned examples that I came across personally that I looked at abstractly as like an idea. So the idea behind having an ARG kind of community that's deliberately looking at reality in an alternative way, having a SOTS style community which is taking the reality as whatever the status quo descriptor of it is, and sort of having a sort of unification over an issue with it, or an aspect of it. The third is the transition, which is a pragmatic sort of a organization that essentially says, what do we have, what do we need, how do we do what we need with what we have, and how do we bring people together to actually agree on these on the wants and the needs and the haves at the same time. So like, how do we actually get people to work together outside of the context of any corporate company that's going to force it on them, right? Like, it's how do we self-choose these situations? Portal Mountain being, of course, the more academic, sort of like theoretical portion of it, where you just feed your head with the information of how it works and how it's all supposed to work. So the two edges have two extremes. One where you basically self-hallucinate. The other is where you bury yourself in theory.
Right.
And in between, you have a sort of a crisscrossing situation of both believing that something needs to be done and participating in activities that get things done certain ways. So those two, pragmatism and belief,
Right.
and belief in something, they kind of tend to overlap each other quite a bit.
So I would put true SOTS. I'm going to qualify SOTS as true because
We're not
as we all
talking
know,
about you guys. It's not you guys.
Just
It's the
qualify
other
that.
SOTS. The true SOTS.
Right. Yeah.
Of which I'm still a part of.
Let's not get too.
I mean,
Let's not
What?
offend anybody.
what's going on?
But you know, it's like stuff has been happening since the beginning, and it just hasn't stopped. But yeah, anyways, let's not get into that trap.
SOTS.
So we have an arrangement here, which is kind of shoehorned in.
Yeah.
This is still HGMA format, meaning from the top to bottom, whole on. Can I point to that? Whole on. Whole on. Guild. Model. Archetype.
Yeah. So the archetype is, of course, the least defined thing. It's the potential of something, whereas like the true SOTS is the realization of it, the activities that are happening. Transition actually like works as a mechanism of making that happen, right? Like, it's like, what are the assets? What are the people? What are the activities?
Right, but it seems like you're dropped into a structure, like the whole wax on, wax off structure. Like, just start doing this.
It gives you a framework as to how to do true SOTS, basically.
Right.
Like, those two are really, if I can stress this one point, in the holonic model, in this, sorry, gross. In the triadic model, with the holon on top, you always have two extremes, the top and the bottom, and a kind of a interchanging, sort of flipping around soft core in between, where you have pragmatism and devotion. You're devoted, so you're pragmatic. You're pragmatic, so you're devoted, and so on and so forth. So those two feed each other really, really well.
Abstract concrete in the middle.
Yeah, which sort of are shaped by the visions and the mechanics that are at the extreme ends, right? They're like, one supplies the context, the other the terminology, and together it all works in the middle. Is one way to look at it, with the middle being like a push-pull situation, where you got like a pull towards one end and a push towards another, and together it creates a sort of like a
Right.
metastability.
With an experience, there is no experience.
That's
of
an actual
concrete.
term, metastability.
Right.
Scientific.
There's no experience of concrete without abstraction. So
You cannot express anything.
You encounter a chair. The only reason you know it's that you've encountered a chair is because of that abstract concept of a chair in general.
Chairness.
Right. Chairness.
What the hell is a chair?
You see chairness.
Exactly. So everything concrete is expressed in abstract terms. All abstractions are ever found in concrete things. Like, you can't find tableness out in the world. You can find this table, you can find that table, but no tableness.
Right. This is kind of harkens back to what do you call them? Platonic forms.
Except the conclusions made about those things. We're not from the same conclusions. We're using the same concepts.
Right. Yeah.
But we're not saying that platonic forms are the permanent things. They're not.
Is,
there's no such
or
thing.
is the true reality.
Yeah,
the,
like what we're
the
saying
perfect
would
is
be,
the true, like the circle is the true reality, and we're just
Well,
encountering a imperfect.
what we're saying is
imperfection.
that they affect each other to such a degree that one is not apart from the other in any capacity.
Right.
So all abstract things are explicitly
Yeah.
expressed in concrete things. So you don't have you don't have that chair as an object. You have this chair, that chair, this other chair, and they all share chairness as a concept in the abstract.
Right.
So you don't get an object without that abstraction, and you don't
Right.
get an abstraction without
They're
a concrete
not,
object in any
not separable. And from Plato, we began to worship the
abstract.
the abstract.
Because
the,
you can apparently it doesn't shift, which is again a false claim.
right. Mm-hmm.
It cannot be.
We're given
true-
given the illusion that it doesn't.
Exactly.
And
The reason it cannot be is because it's always expressed in concrete things, and they are always
Right.
in flux.
And this is a weird thing, how logic is a property of analogic, of analogy.
Yeah.
In other words, it's emergent.
It's the isomorphism that's
Um,
important between the layers, not the actual, not
Here's-
any one specific instance.
a weird statement. Timelessness is emergent. There you go.
Sure, because
There is
every
no-
moment is every moment is. I agree with that 100%. Every single moment is absolutely entirely timeless,
Which almost.
but
yeah.
is always an emergent moment of the previous.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah,
there
it's
is
in context that
there's
you experience
always that.
Yeah.
And with that, I need another short break.
Okay.
Sorry,
Be
guys.
right back, folks. I got you. I got you, buddy. What did you just realize? We're still on. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
Let's
I forget.
let's just stay there for a second. We're not back yet, okay? What did you realize?
I forget now.
No. Miss you?
Yeah.
That's what it is. I miss me too. Miss me too. So I think we're semi getting off track here.
We kind of are, but it's still fine. we're talking about timelessness and
Yeah, well, we're describing abstract and concrete, the
which is very
relationship,
much
yeah.
always the basis for behind the scene, and we got there because
Yeah. If anybody wants to figure out what we're talking about, they want to anchor themselves in some way that they can understand. And this is, in my opinion, the relationship between abstract and concrete is that, like, the best way, like, that I've found to explain to people. Like,
Yeah,
how do you
this
orient
is
yourself
probably-
with this HGMA, the triad protocol, the holonic view of reality as things as holons? Things have a concrete
Here-
aspect, an abstract aspect.
I really want to point
aspect.
out that what I found is that if you do that, my experience says that this is useless without the other two.
Right.
Like
You
the
get-
other two extremes.
You
be-
get
beyond
limited,
that.
but you get oriented, and then you can expand. No, or how do you,
No, because
Where do you
because,
start?
because the problem is that it doesn't get grounding.
that is ground? Okay, okay, what?
It doesn't get grounding in itself. It doesn't self-reference yet, but it can
Right.
be. It can, because it's kind of funny. There's another relationship of abstract and concrete going on within the four.
So where
columns.
would you start?
So
Somewhere
where's the pencil?
people can understand.
Where's the pencil?
There is
Just kind of want to draw it.
There is no pencil. Here you go. Here.
So, what happens is, like, so we got abstract and concrete, right? Like that, right?
Yeah.
So here we get mimetic,
Yeah.
abstract, concrete, and hold on.
So, like you're saying, each perspective is divided yet again into abstract and concrete
Exactly.
again. Right.
And when you do that, that's when you get the full picture. If we don't do that step, you don't get the self-reference into it.
I don't think I've thought about it that way.
I forget what the
Does that?
I forget where that thought happened
It's
in
not
my
gonna
head
work.
and when. So A is for abstract, C is for concrete, and then at the top you see mimetic, abstract, concrete, and holonic. Or shared, rather.
Close enough.
Yeah, so that's actually the relationship there as well. I forget the details of that thought pattern. You're more than welcome to explore the idea.
I don't think I've taken that route.
Yeah. So take the idea of abstract, divide it into an abstract and a concrete sense, and you get the mimetics and the abstraction itself. To give the concrete divided into the abstract part, the devotion, or the object, and their narratives, their stories, their concreteness.
I feel like I don't want to get into that.
No,
but I
no,
wanna
it's a
continue
different.
on.
It's an entirely different subject, but
we will get into that
but
later.
abstract and
not today.
this is what I'm trying to say is that your hunch is very correct. Abstract and concrete is literally the be all and all of the entire schema.
Mm.
But on its own, it doesn't do it. If it starts to self-reflect into
Right. Okay. So, to my explanation of how do you jump from abstract concrete out to mimetic and shared, whatever you
Mhm.
call it.
Yeah, shared.
Yeah, is there is a dynamic relationship between abstract and concrete, which is invisible. You don't really think about it, but one affects the other all the time, and that is the outside. Those
Okay, sure.
outsides.
So the one is being the trajectory, the other being the mechanics.
Mhm.
That works as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you look at the trajectory and mechanics as an abstraction and a concretion,
Right.
the same schema works.
Sure. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't do that. I
That's
didn't do
okay.
that.
That's cool. That's what I'm here for.
So we were talking about our products. We were looking at then we were looking at networks as our products, and we were thinking, can we get into any kind of details about an actual product of like how of so facilitation, this is my word that I would use to say, okay, I want to facilitate the corporation, my part to play within a corporation. How do I lay out this these pieces so that others can understand what's being facilitated, what is actually happening, the comings and goings of the corporation, the interactions, and this brings me back to the deck schema and all that kind of stuff, like about having commitments and execution, as well as protocols and constraints, right? Can we link that in? Do you think we have time? We got about an hour left. Is there any potential of articulating that space of like, how do we actually keep track of what's going on within these interactions?
Yeah. So yes and no. So because in one sense it's still a work in progress. I haven't had the time to articulate to myself even what a network meta product looks like. But I kind of knew.
You mean like these four?
Yeah, I
Right.
know what the purpose behind it. Like it's a matter of satisfying each archetype stack. Like all of
Right.
that. All of that is there, except the details.
So these four things are linked all together in a sort of clockwork almost.
Yeah, they
And
have
that
to be.
clockwork, if we want to describe it, we're looking at Portal Mountain.
Mhm.
And Portal Mountain as the academic thing of what we're doing is how do we organize our brain, our mind, our neural net on our own as an archetype for what's going out and expanding out into these other networks. And that, I think, is the how do we almost calculate, it sounds weird, but calculate the
Yeah.
relationships between people, and what are we doing, and what does it mean to have a proximity guild with certain mediation in it,
Right.
right? How do you describe that mediation? Like, let's say we have a shared commitment. How do you just have a card on the table or whatever in your brain, a card in your
Yeah.
brain that says this is important, that's important, that's important, right? And so let's focus on this. And you have a card representing it, and which may unfold.
And again, this is in a shared context. We're not talking about egos trying to trip over each other. We're not talking about like, I think this is important and you think this is
Right.
important and therefore we have to decide. No, we already have laid out what's important. We are already in agreement
Right.
that this and that and the other thing is important.
Potentially
so in that
it's a
case, that's the scenario.
negotiation.
Yeah, no, that part would be. We're already arrived at that part. So we're not
Right.
talking about like the whole... we're not talking about the whole ego tripping, like
There's
think
lots
my
of details,
why is
yeah.
my idea not in there kind of
We're
deal.
talking about after the fact.
That's the accent I put on by the way.
We've
for that.
determined that this is our shared goal.
Yeah.
This needs to be done,
So
or else this is not going to happen.
So that's covered. I'm just trying to say that
Right.
part is covered.
Get all that ego stuff out of the way. We're just talking about the machine-like interaction, I guess you could say, of the social body,
Getting it done.
to describe what the world is, right?
Again, this is where we come back to the idea of the sentient machine. We're not talking about necessarily Terminators here. We're talking about like us. We're talking about our society itself being a sentient machine. We're building it. We're creating it out of something, right? Out of something tangible, which is us. We're talking. We're spreading language. We're spreading concepts. That is the machine that we're talking about. And what we're trying to do is to make it sentient, as in aware of itself, as in when it does something, it doesn't kill itself.
Right.
Just by being like, and I'm not talking about like malicious intent here. I'm talking about like people actually kill themselves by just not paying attention to their surroundings, right? How many times has that happened?
Mm-hmm.
The whole society going that way? is a little bit more.
Right. Right.
It makes much more sense to actually tackle that problem.
And so this is why we would want to describe collectively, to the best of our ability, what the situation is, right?
Yeah.
You've got it within in artifacts. Let's call them, like, for me it's going to be most comfortable to think about index cards as a medium. We can talk more abstractly about what's in your head,
Yeah.
right? But I think index cards as a medium,
I like programs as a medium. That's how I think about it.
right? So we each have our own way of thinking about this, but we have to kind of
Yeah.
settle on something just to figure out,
This is to show you that we're not actually the same person.
just to figure out how is it that we are going to share, and it will go to program, of course. That'll be
Yeah, no, I
way
mean-
more efficient than index cards, right? Obviously,
Index cards are programs to me as well. I don't see.
right?
I see the terminology as a secondary aspect to it.
Right. Right. So when we go within a medium, when we constrain ourselves to a medium like index cards, that means that we've got a square of paper and we have to section it off for example, having the top part as a title, right?
Yeah,
To reference how does this card relate itself in, right? The schema.
Yeah, give it a type, give it some sort of meta information to, like, say, hey, I contain this, but I'm also part. But read me in this context. Don't read me from that context.
Right.
Don't read me like I will not make sense to you if you read me here. I will only
Yeah.
make sense to you if you read me there.
So one of the basic components of the deck, we'll call it deck or index card deck, whatever schema, is that you have to have a title space, I guess. You call it title space?
Yeah, label.
Meta space, label. So you have the content, but you also have a label.
Yeah,
right?
you have a name to it.
And
Your content is now named. You can refer to that name to
Right.
refer to the content.
Right.
That's abstraction in its like purest form, like right there. Just take one big giant thing, give it this tiny little name, plug it in, move on.
Right. So my approach and thought has been to bring in the temperamental triads, starting with devotional. So you've got the triad execution at the bottom within the concrete. You've got commitment, and then you've got a narrative, right? That's concrete,
That's their operations.
abstract, and mimetic, right?
Yep.
That's the triad, right? So I would expect you have different types of cards, maybe a concrete, an abstract, and a mimetic card, potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got cards to deal with execution, some to deal with commitments themselves, which is an abstraction.
So, how would you feel about some cards are facilitate conversation, some cards facilitate broadcast, some cards facilitate information, like just data basically, and some
Right.
cards would be like procedural, like data but expressed in a way that says do this, do that, do that, because that becomes
Yeah.
the dashboard.
Right. So yeah, and this comes back to the dashboard research that we've done.
Which are okay, so I just want to clarify that the dashboard stems from what's called the modes of operation, which are derived from the temperaments, which is a derivation of the Archetype Models Guild Holon articulation given to the dynamics between people, roughly
And-
speaking.
Modes of operation being like conversation, broadcast.
Yeah, so we have conversation, so I need to speak to you, somebody, personally. Broadcast is a relational thing. I need to relate to my group somehow, so I'm going to just put it out there. You will get feedback, but it's like you're talking at the group. You're not talking with a specific person here or there or there. You're talking to like a broad audience.
Right. Yeah.
And then you have a mode of operation, which is simply like stop talking, just do. just do. But this is the wax on, wax off metaphor we keep using. So that's that. And then there is like the type that's simply just like, I need to understand everything that I'm doing.
And what are those again? So conversation, broadcast.
Broadcast. Conversation broadcast.
We must know.
It's in the wiki. Just a search.
Conversation, broadcast, workshop, and
literature. Well, yeah, workshop. Do a workshop. Stop talking. Just do. Literature. It's like stop doing. Stop
Workshop
talking.
as do, yeah.
Like, just give me the mechanics of it. Like I want the literature on this.
Right.
The concept, all the theory possible. So these are the different modes that we're talking through.
So my kind of intuition, I guess, or whatever, is almost just because I'm comfortable with the workshop type of idea of and what we talked about, the mediation of the corporation, right? Corporations have mediation. They're how to do what they do, right? The stack of people, whatever, together are doing a certain functionality, and the workshop part of that describes how the functioning of, like, protocol based.
It's a list. It's like a checklist. Do this. Do
Right.
that. Do the next thing. Do the next thing.
Right. So that's
If
what
this is happening, do that. If that is happening, however, don't do that. Do this.
Right. So that kind of thing is what I want to capture, and I think it expands out into broadcast and conversation.
Well, if you look at it, it is a program.
How to do a broadcast, how to do a conversation.
It is a literature in itself. Like this is the rules of the road. This is the protocol. Right. This is the system they use.
Right. Except it's
Like,
embodied.
The differences. A lot of the differences is in like the where the thing is happening. In a workshop, you're doing the thing. In literature, you're reading about people that do the things, right? So it's still connected, but it's not the same thing, and yet it is, right? It's a representational in some ways. They're all one thing.
Right. Yep.
When you're doing the thing, you're actually also interacting with the thing. So this becomes a personal sort of interaction, and you're also putting something out there. So you're literally leaving a broadcast out there when you're doing something. So a lot of these things seem like they're separate concepts, but aren't in any way.
Yeah. So again, with the intuition thing, and about the guild being this kind of mediational. Be right back, folks. Okay, fine. Finding stuff. Oof. Okay. We are finding stuff. Open. Yeah.
Yeah. All right there, Brittany.
Okay. Oh, no. Back.
Oh no.
Okay,
no.
we're just pulling up some charts here. Don't mind us.
Yeah, just reflecting back on some
Important. What do you want? Which one? First?
Well, this one will reflect like the immediate sort of temperamental conversation stuff that we wanted to go by. So this is the software idea.
Yeah.
Where you're in a context, you are an agent, you are starting up conversations because that's your relational part. You do broadcasts because that's your devotional part. You do
Right. This kind of evokes a question of bootstrapping to me, because I think that you need to kind of tell people or make it aware to the agents what are they supposed to do. And so that to me is the mediation part.
Yeah.
Whereas this is kind of like you have conversation and broadcast, and then
but this mediates it.
right. But and exactly, and there's things to be done within broadcasting and within conversing, protocols within all of this stuff, right? But to me, the protocols are what holds everything together and how you describe everything. So
Yeah.
to have a system like this, which doesn't, and unless it's, I guess in the programming itself, you don't have to know what it's doing. You log into the system and you're becoming part of a conversation.
Superficially, sure.
Right. So okay, I know I'm part. I have to select a peer and make a comment. Right.
Yeah. So this system is actually designed to have two sort of approaches, top down and bottom up kind of thing. So what you're talking about is the top down. You
Should
don't
we
know.
turn the light on, maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Why not?
Why not? I don't know where the switch is.
Proceed. I will switch it on.
Yeah. So the main.
You're not going to the dark.
Yeah. So the one way of looking at it is exactly what you're saying. You just start off with like, I don't know how the system is working. I'm having conversations. I know these people. I'm going to this lobby. I'm striking up conversation with this person. I'm going to that lobby. I strike up a conversation with that person. I'm ending this conversation. I'm continuing that conversation. Blah 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 blah. You're just using the software. Blah, blah. As you keep going down the layers, though, you'll see a broadcast, but then you'll see something like more interesting, a very kind of a specific kind of broadcast. That's a data entry. Boom. So in this case, you're now becoming a database administrator, putting data into a database instead of conversation strings into a chat room. So the system is the same actually, but the context of the system is different.
Mm-hmm.
What you're feeding the system is like a little bit more refined, and it has a bit more meaning to behind
This
it.
is a
And then the third one is
interesting-
a different kind of
okay.
data entry point, where you not only are telling the system what the data is, but how to use it. So as the system is evolving as the system is being inputted from that end of the spectrum, what happens in the conversation end of the spectrum, it can actually be manipulated, and the conversation end could be read by that end of the system and get modified by it as well. And so the two
Mm-hmm.
ends speak to each other in a certain way.
Interesting. Yep. I was just thinking of like the difference between having a conversation or writing an article.
So that would be like conversation would be one way to do a broadcast. So the broadcast would be like the conversation itself.
Could be. Yeah.
So that's
start and an end.
So that's like more like an interview.
Broadcast is kind of curated to some extent.
So you
right?
take that idea, and then instead of saying, okay, the content of the conversation of the broadcast don't have to be a back and forth. They have to be paragraphs by the same person. So now the messages take on a different role. The conversation takes on a different role. So now conversation is a title, the messages are the paragraphs, and the whole thing is now in a different context. Same data,
Yeah.
same data points, they're interpreted completely differently.
Mm-hmm. As a more like authoritative type of
Yeah, like the composition is brought together not by,
and there's usually
but by.
this there's some work to be done to curate something into such a broadcast.
Yeah, broadcast is definitely something that's prepared.
It's not just spewing words at each other or at the world.
Yeah, no,
It's-
that would
yeah.
constitute as like a simple message in the lobby, which is recorded as just that, just the rant. So that's the differences between the two, the way those things are composed.
Yeah. So again, my intuition is that, and has been that, this is great. I understand that it's happening, and that this stack sort of builds up from a kind of fundamental thing up to that point where you're having the what to do part, like the glue, the mediation part. But the mediation part to me seems like the most important, because that
So-
tells you how to converse, how to broadcast, how to do this, how to
So
do
this
that.
is where lobbies get an important role, actually, because every lobby would have a certain set of protocols associated with it. What constitutes, for example, coherence.
Right.
For yourself, what is coherent is what you decide. In the context of, say, the natural guilds, what is coherent is definitely not what you decide. It is what it's the constraints of the natural guilds themselves that decide that, right? So each
Right.
lobby,
It works or it doesn't.
yeah. So within each lobby, what coherence means
Cheers.
is going to be a separate. Is not going to be based on the same criteria. Which means, but and also in each lobby you have your own coherence score. You don't carry your coherence score between lobbies, because otherwise,
So we're kind of getting into a
implementation details. Yeah.
an idea of that we kind of brought up a little bit earlier, is that these proximity guilds potentially each would have their own lobby,
Yeah.
in which conversations happen and bubble up,
Exactly.
right. So we're seeing this whole thing bubble up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. A lobby isn't just Portal Mountain lobby or this place or that. It's anywhere you have a proximity guild, you're having communication between individuals.
The lobby is a software term I'm using simply to indicate that a whole bunch of individuals can use it to interact
Right.
with each other. If they're not in the same lobby, they can't make the contact. Being in that lobby is the conceptual equivalent of being able to connect with each other
Right.
and,
So
overhear each other as well.
the fact that we're having multiple dots here, which represent like an individual or whatever, the multiple dots wrapped up into a single context means, and their ability to communicate means that we're having a shared space, that which we call a lobby.
Yeah, that's and lobby is only used in the context of conversation and broadcast.
Right, and
Once you get
it's-
into data entry, I actually call this database. So you log into the database, you don't enter the lobby. So there's a difference in the way you frame it. It's the same action.
So
Like,
conversation.
it's
What about
exactly-
broadcast? Where does broadcast
Broadcast, it's just a bulletin board.
fit in that?
The metaphor.
So
I'm-
lobby or
lobby
database?
still.
Right.
So there's a bulletin board in the lobby. There is and you can take conversations in the lobby. But when you want
Right.
to enter data, you log into a database. You don't enter a lobby. You log into a database.
Fine.
A database is a lobby.
Fine.
Like conceptually, though, the action is contextually is different.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of sending a message, you enter data. You create
Um,
data entry.
because there is a much more intentional action happening in which you're lifting out information, which we're at like the hyper narrative level. You're entering data which is abstracted away from the happenings of normal space, in which this data is supposed to apply to multiple spaces, right?
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially.
It depends on what you're entering, really. Right? It could be just a record for that context. It doesn't have to be like a data
Right.
entry could be a message, just done much more manually, right? Instead of, so if I was a geek, which I am, instead of sending you a message in a conversation, I would log into a database and make an entry into the conversations table or something, or to the messages table that
But-
belongs to that conversation.
So are we
Do you know
stepping
what I
up
mean?
to a workshop?
Yeah, this
level-ish?
is the workshop. Yeah,
Right.
that kind of activity would be workshop-ish. Entering data, not trying to relate it to a personal activity, but more like a general pattern of behavior.
Right.
So the idea of conversing and the idea of entering data is actually the same, but just to different contexts. So, again, to bring it home, like as a nerd, you might not want to send a message back in a conversation. You might want to log into that database and create a data entry that represents that message instead, right? Which amounts to exactly the same thing.
Interesting.
But the
Sounds like a
the-
technicality to me.
Well, the interface would be different,
Right.
right? You'd be basically like not using the UI, but hacking the database behind the UI to put the data in. So it's like we're using PHP MyAdmin versus using the app that's using
Hmm. Yeah.
MySQL.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That
Concepts you're familiar with?
resonates. Resonates.
Yeah, so it's like going behind the scenes. So data entry could potentially be used for doing that, and
Mm-hmm.
program entry is data entry, but the data winds up meaning a specific thing. Right? Because when you write a program, you're still writing a text file. You're just
Right.
running through a different set of programs than a document. So
Mhm.
that's the difference there. So together, it's just one conversation.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
whole thing is just a
So you're,
conversation engine.
the program
But it's
you're,
got a
you're
couple
building
layers.
you're building something that's going to take in the data and interpret it and move it around.
Now imagine if programs started to use the conversation engine and then take that data as data entries and then take that data as programs.
Well, this is the system, right?
Starts with the human, but it doesn't end there.
Yep. So do we?
And this ancient machine. So embassy is supposed to be
Right.
conversation.
Yeah.
Great bonfire is supposed to be broadcast. Crystal Garden is supposed to be data entry,
I'll
and
move this over a little bit.
and field research lab is supposed to be the way to take that data entry and
Yeah.
put it into rules.
Right. So this is our dashboard prototype, one of our products.
Yep. And it's in the context
representing-
of the guild dynamics right now.
What does that mean?
It means it's looking at education.
Oh, okay.
So coherence is calculated
right,
through
right.
is calculated versus.
This is the
you know.
context,
Yeah.
I guess. Yep. Right, and these are the, I can't click on it, but those would expand out to those natural guilds.
Yeah, that's actually the same list.
And so within a corporation which has been spun up to satisfy some initiative, we would have a whole stack of things to be done, potentially taken care of.
This
And
is
then-
one of the dashboards they would use to be able to communicate the coherence of their ideas.
and then a whole bunch of conversation. So you would click in to like whatever trade or whatever, like whatever little portion, and then have discussions
There
on
would
trade.
be there would be dashboards for each proximity guild. Those would be still connected to fundamental guilds. Those would still be connected to this dashboard, which is the natural guilds. So there's like a lot of different kind of pre-built networking within the dashboard ecosystem, and that's again to bootstrap everything. Just like you have to bootstrap with Scepter and the network and the virtual machine and all that, this is kind of a same idea. And so our bootstrap takes care of the mediation, the membership, and the networking. The 3 fundamental guilds, which is exactly what the dashboard is supposed to do. So beyond that,
Yep.
it's
Do what
left
you
to-
want.
Yeah, and it's a peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
Not now.
Right.
Like ideally, it's a peer-to-peer thing. So you really never have to worry about who's running your program, kind of thing. Like it's
Who has control of the data?
there is no such thing as control of data. There's data.
Right.
There's reputation. Control. Control is a different question. There is the typical, like, I am me kind of identity kind of stuff, but there is the whole imaginary branch to this process, so that it's not laid out quite clearly yet. The point being is that some things are verified through merit, not identity.
My monitor died. So we are very, very close. Very close. Why
Yeah.
did my monitor die, though?
Yeah, let me figure that out. I'll be right back.
Okay. Oh, monitor is back.
Okay.
Signal is bad. Signal is bad. Gotta probably do a hard connection instead of wireless. For these, yeah. So we are very close to this this particular image. I kind of doubt that we'll get into it though, but this is kind of the idea. So we've got this is laying out the various deck schemas possible, and how we started with this is the 3 different actually 4 different temperaments, but 3 different temperaments here, starting with devotional, the concrete stack here on the right side. In the middle we have pragmatic stack of basically triad protocol. The academic on the right, or sorry, on the left side here. And so I was just saying that this image here, I'm not sure if we will actually get into it, but it is the deck schema image.
It's one of the
Which
first ones, right?
We've been sprinting to. This is when I did the card box game instruction manual.
And
This
how old is it?
One of the images that came with it. Less than a year, like
Less
eight,
than a year,
8
okay.
months, 6 months old.
Okay. I thought it was older.
No, this is like, I've been trying to sprint towards this for a while,
Yeah, no, I know.
and so this I'm not
I
sure
haven't even got to fight to my own products here, so I mean.
if we're gonna get into it. I don't know, but like tonight. But
We got maybe a good 10 minutes to discuss it before we got to rush.
sure. Yep. So that's it. So we've got the temperamental triads.
Yeah.
We've got devotional, pragmatic, academic, and then within each box here, I've expected there to be a card type. That could be wrong, could be right, such as an execution card, a commitment card, a protocol card, a constraint card,
Mm-hmm.
a program card, a concept card,
Mm-hmm.
right? As a way of articulating, for the purpose of facilitating
these intra corporation
Forget the word corporation.
Organization.
Just talk people.
organization.
Just talk people.
How do people organize together? They have commitments, and they have execution on those commitments, right?
So-
And this is a concrete thing.
So I'd like to point out that commitment is a is a history log, not commitments are not the tasks you're going to do. That's a schedule. A commitment
Yeah,
is
that,
what you've
that
done.
distinction, right?
A
Yep.
commitment is what you've done.
I
You
recall.
were a commitment. You
I
were
brought
committed to
that
this.
up. It's a very good point. It's because you can say you want to do all of these things, but what did you actually do?
Yeah.
That is what your commitments are.
Exactly. So
This
like,
is a very tough bullet to bite.
yeah. So commitment is very different. Contextually here, used very differently than what normal people would use it as. Commitment is not a future endeavor. A commitment is a record of your intentions.
Right.
So if you look back and you say, I've done this, 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 this,
Right.
this.
You can see what
you
you've
can
been
see
committed to.
There
This
you
is
go.
what you've been committed to.
That's your commitment. So that is commitment.
Right.
So-
you commit something as you do it. In other
And
words,
you're-
you commit it to the record. You commit it to history.
Yeah. So your execution is very much influenced by your commitment, because you're going to commit something else on top of something you've committed.
Right.
That's the drive.
As an abstract conceptualization of what has been done, what the state of things are.
So to bridge that gap, the terminology that is used in place of the typical word commitment is schedule, or meta schedule in our case, because our schedules aren't actually linear; they're in flux, and so they're modified each time something is executed and a commitment is recorded. The schedule is modified. So there's that relationship going on. So a
Right.
schedule is not a static schedule. A schedule is basically like, what is the next task based on the execution and the commitment record.
Right.
So I just want to clarify a
Yep.
couple of different but important details about this thought process.
And this gets in very an interesting point here is when you're having multiple commitments from multiple people in a group, when they tend to do their actions, things just there's fallout. It happens how it happens, and people have to modify what they're doing as it happens, because you can only have so much certainty of your own will.
That's why there's a scheduling aspect to it, and it's in flux. You have
Right.
to switch the next task based on what was committed.
Right. Yeah. What happened? Right. It committed.
That's the relationship of this word.
From the
really.
group perspective, especially, it's easy to see that, I think.
Mhm.
So to jump over to the abstract, just quickly to show how that changes. This is in kind of general what processes have to happen, or how does the process happen to do that thing, and everybody's going to have a different map in their mind of how something gets done, right?
Yep. But there are certain things that cannot happen to make it happen, right? And that's what we call a constraint.
Right.
If the constraint is broken,
If the thing blows up.
so yeah, like
Whatever.
if the constraint is broken, what you want to happen just can't happen, right? Like
Right.
it's if you want to have a solid piece of pencil right here, your constraint is you cannot put a force above so and so
Right.
joules into like this rotational angle, whatever. You know what I mean, like torque, or I don't know how to describe this completely properly, but the idea is the
It
same.
won't be a pencil anymore. If
Exactly.
You, apply a certain
You
force
break
to
that
it.
constraint, the pencil will break. I cannot put it back together. All that happens, and so that's what we mean. The constraint is that thing that is it doesn't matter how you think about the idea. You break that, there is no idea.
And we're kind of getting into the whole holonic stack of layers and things that need to be in place for us, even as humans, to exist and our environments.
Not the guild, the mediation layer of the guild, the natural guilds. I was mentioning before that they constrain each other. That's exactly the same concept I'm talking about. Like they reiterate that if you break these constraints,
Natural guilds.
yeah, if you break these constraints there, the stack that you're maintaining, i.e. the person, the individual, the organism within the environment, who is running a neural OS to maintain a social OS, that stack of existence is broken. When you break any of those constraints that it depends upon,
Mm-hmm.
right? The stack is broken, and it might not die immediately, but it will certainly start
Right.
to hemorrhage and
It depends what part of the stack you're talking about
and how bad
different systems.
and how bad the constraint is, which constraint is specifically broken for at what point in time, for what kind of organism, for there's so many contextual elements to this, but the pattern is the same.
Right.
The constraints, there's a minimal set of constraints that are
Mhm.
captured by the natural guilds.
And the way we capture those is by protocol, by saying this is what you do, to make sure that doesn't happen. You do this, you do
Mhm.
that, and the more
If
we
this,
the more
then
we
that. If this, then that.
the more we
If,
learn
then. If,
through
then.
scientific process, whatever. The
No,
more we
this
learn.
this isn't this the actual heuristic is the scientific method. Yes.
Right. And so when things break, you learn, okay, what do I do to not make that break? And then you have a whole suite of protocols to sustain certain hold-ons, right?
hmm You need to actually have awareness of why the protocols are there, or things can become fiat.
Right.
And when it's fiat, it's easy to break from.
Right.
It's easy to replace one fiat with another.
And this is the problem of any kind of system we'll make. And even if we have a beautiful card system and all that, and we have protocols, if people are not part of that or understanding the experience behind why does a protocol exist, they are
Liable to change it.
to do an action which does not
Yeah, cut corners.
sustain the thing.
It cuts corners, breaks the constraints. When you cut
Right.
corners, you break the constraints. When you break the constraints, you actually break the fundamental
Right.
systems behind
And-
it, and the entire stack becomes unstable.
To my thinking, this is kind of why you can have protocols, but you also need that, like the literature, the academic, to give a more holistic view, right? Like the protocol is just saying, do
Contextualize that.
this, do that,
It gives it context. Yeah.
but you kind of need to learn the whole why are you doing that, right? If you don't learn why you're doing that, then you're just a participant, right? Right, and this-
you don't
this gets
get
in-
you get to be a synthetic neural network, but you don't get to be a sentient machine. If you don't get the
Right.
whys, if you don't get
Yeah.
the full thing,
You get to see.
you don't get to be sentient.
You get to see variables and stuff happening in front of you, and you
And you're a
react.
calculator.
You react to them, but you are
And
not.
you're a great calculator. Don't get me wrong. I'm a calculator myself. You're beautiful. You're a beautiful calculator, but you ain't sentient.
In that case.
Neither am I.
Yeah.
Just to get it out of the way.
Mhm.
I'm not saying I
Yeah.
am, but you ain't either.
Yep. And this is probably like why you need grand mastery and at least to oversee certain domains and all that kind of stuff within a corporation, within an organization.
And to be very, very clear about it, the discussion about grand mastery is not a grand master's discussion. You don't have to be one to talk about the concept, right? Like, nobody here is, in our schema, a grandmaster.
Mhm.
We're barely mastering anything. We're at best members of our own system. At best. Grandmastery is something out there for us, even from our perspective. Like it's something we know is there, but isn't what we are. So to to just put it into perspective, grandmastery is necessary, but it isn't something that needs to be attributed to politics or any of that or mismatching organizational strategy. It has nothing to do with politics or
Mhm.
it has everything to do with being able to do, not only think about, but do the things that we're talking about. Like, really, like we're not masters of our own system. We're aware of it at best.
Mhm. True that.
So, just to put all these weird terminologies out of the way, when we're talking about masters, that's not about us. When we're talking about grandmasters, we're not talking about us.
Right, it's more of an ideal and fleeting at best.
No, but that's the aim. Do we want to be Sure. Let's get this out of the way. Sure. Yeah, we'd like
Fine.
to. We'd like to be grandmasters. What does that mean, though? Yeah.
No, we all have normal lives.
It's not an identity. The thing is that mastery clearly dictates it's not about identity. Yeah. So. Not a trajectory. All right, I'm basically rambling at this point.
Yeah. Sounds like a good point to end our magnificent discussion. We almost got into deck schemas. That's wow. Maybe next time we will start on deck schemas.
Or dashboard again.
Deck schemas.
I think they're both basically fulfilling the same role at this point in terms of explanatory power. So we're in a great spot for either.
We shall see.
We can just do this and that and the other one as variations of the same presentation.
Yep. Yep. That's it's tricky. I've noticed the difficulty in approaching. Even like the idea of putting it down on card and having card types, defining types. This is what a schema is. You're defining the types of cards you can
Why
have.
do you think I don't have software yet? As soon as I
That-
I'm writing the dashboard. I'm like, but when my dashboard is supposed to explain the dashboard, so I'm trying to write that part of it down.
Right.
But this is supposed to explain that part. Oh fuck!
Yes.
Oh fuck! Oh fuck! Oh
It's
fuck!
a continuous oh fuck loop.
So that's why I gave up on that. And
Of
I'm just
which-
like, okay, conversation engine first.
You know what? Yeah, that's fine. Like build up from the bottom. I get it. I get it.
You could participate in that one. Because you were saying if you were able to tackle programming, if you're wanting to tackle programming,
Right.
I'm using the language we use as the basis for how that's going to be programmed. So when you're reading code,
Programming is no problem.
but so basically when you're reading code, you should be able to translate our English sentences that we speak to each other to that.
Right.
That's the way I want to build it.
I want to build it by having the most basic rudimentary prototype of a system built into index cards types, deck schema. The most rudimentary. And I know that you lose a lot by having to constrain to this card structure.
So if this schema can hold up a conversation, will you accept that as the schema, as a version of that schema? Let's put that schema into a purpose. Let's make conversations.
And which I've had.
Lobbies?
I've actually had.
So the lobbies. Do you remember that conversation? Enter in the lobby. If you're a lobby, you're available. If you're not, you can be requested to have a conversation.
I've tested deck protocol. In one case, with a buddy of mine,
we ended up having card after card that stretched out of our whole conversation, and we could look back and see it. This after a whole night of, and it was like a snake of, this is what we talked about, right? And then you pick out of that, and then you pick out of that. It's like layer and layer, right?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So
That's what I want to build.
Okay, so if we take your idea of cards, but only use the schema for conversation at first,
Fine.
we're at the same spot as me trying to build a dashboard, but only focusing on the conversation agent. It becomes the same project. Because then we're using a basic data unit to collect information about this conversation, and then we can reason about how to process that.
How to translate it up the layers. Fine.
And
that's
the layers getting up.
That's a starting point.
And the conversation is the most basic unit, is because all you need is 2 agents, 1 space, 1 agreement to connect it all together, right? Now you have a data structure to parse, to analyze.
Right, from which everything bubbles up.
It's kind of, and
Fine.
then to bring it back to home to you is like when we start writing programs will have conversations with programs, take that stuff, analyze it.
See, I just want a set of cards that can articulate, make this structure, make this conversation structure.
That's the dashboard. That's the first iteration of the dashboard. The second part of the dashboard is reuse your dashboard with a dashboard. That's a different story.
I think we're on the same page.
Yeah. Make your game work for conversation. I'll make the dashboard work for conversation. We'll compare notes.
Yep.
Where they different, we'll try to figure out where the fixes should go. Maybe the game, maybe the software. Who knows?
Yep.
Project complete. Learn
Okay, buddy.
TypeScript.
Good times.
Learn TypeScript, because you know what else? If you do it the programming way, you actually start to think about your project, like the actual physical card game,
Yeah.
in the programming sense. So now you have iterations of like how could actually, the algorithms behind of actually how it works. So the program is going to help the physical.
Damn.
Because you're
Alright.
just going to follow the same protocols, right?
We're cool.
Isomorphisms.
We're good.
Shut it off, man.
We're good.
Just
We
shut
good.
it off already.
Don't shut it off yet.
No,
we're
we
not-
gotta, no, we gotta go.
We're not done yet.
We gotta go.
We're long past done. All right, buddies, ladies and gentlemen.
No, we gotta go.
Thank you for all the comments, Jacob. Shout out to Jacob, our man Jacob. You get an extreme thank you, and to all Portal Mountain Lobby and all our peeps.